Welcome, everybody, to Unsheathed Sword Reviews. I'm John.
I'm Vic.
Hey, Vic, today's a special day, isn't it?
Is it, John? You know what? I think it is a special day. Why is that?
We're collaborating with Kane Shen today.
Yeah, buddy.
Exactly.
Yes, we are.
And what are we collaborating on, Vic?
So today we are doing a collab with Kane Shen on the Balaur Arms Alexandria sword made by Chen.
Excellent. And it's worth noting, too, that this was originally going to be a three-way collaboration with Alientude.
Unfortunately, Kyle was not able to make this collab, but do check out his video. I know he's still going to work on a solo review. It should be out today by the time this video is uploaded. And definitely check that video out. I'm really curious what he has to say about the sword. Like and subscribe to his channel. But we were, however, fortunate enough to do the collab with Kane Shen. And if you guys haven't checked his channel out, please do so. Dude is super knowledgeable both in the historical accuracy of swords and the movement and like how to use them. And he's just like a super cool guy.
Just a really, really wonderful guy to talk to, very knowledgeable about swords, and really has gone out of his way to welcome us into the sword review community, which we really appreciate.
Right, as does Kyle. So yeah, definitely really feel welcomed by both of them.
Absolutely. So if you get the time, go check their channels out and like and subscribe. You know, all four of you on our channel who haven't seen those,
don't know
right?
who they are, right?
Mom, go check it out. You'll like it.
Yeah, definitely. Well played.
All right. Okay. So why is it made by Chen if it's a Balaur Arms sword?
Well, that's a great question, John. So Balaur Arms is basically Cult of Athena's brand, and they have had different forges throughout the years making swords for them. Most recently, they had Windlass, and they were making kind of budget level swords, kind of in the $200 to $300 range, which were generally received pretty well. Recently, though, they started making mid-range swords, and they were having the maker Chen, the famed Chinese sword manufacturer, make those swords. 3 recent models were put out, and of which I have 2. Check out our review of the Kriegsmesser on the channel, and this is the newest longsword in that line, the Alexandria.
So this is something that I was very excited about because I have quite a few Chen swords, as many of you know from watching the channel, and the extent to which they do research and design blades that maybe their fit and finish isn't always spectacular, but their functionality is always great. So we were both very excited to see how that translates to European swords. And so far, it has been absolutely, I am blown away and impressed by everything we've seen them make so far.
Yes, and as you guys know, if you watched our videos, John, he likes the Chinese swords and has collected several Chen models. And while I've really enjoyed them, I more lean toward medieval European swords. Longswords mostly. So when they started announcing that line from them, specifically this one, I was really excited. And because there's not a lot of 18Cs on the market that are in this price range.
And that's the issue. And so you have to wonder when you have a lot of swords that are in the high end range that use this blade type, like the Principe from Albion and the, what's the other one?
Alexandria from Albion.
Yeah, Alexandria from Albion.
Arms and Armor.
Yep. So they are obviously good swords and fantastic. And so we were curious about what corners they were going to have to cut to get that to be a mid-range sword. And fit and finish wise, I don't know. It seems like there really weren't too many that they cut.
Yeah. So real quick, though, before we touch on the fit and finish, there's broad description on what an 18C should be.
Absolutely.
So Oakshot type 18C, and this is a cut and thrust sword in the type 18 family. Its most distinctive characteristic is how broad the blade is. Most of them are about 3 inches broad at the base. You can see how wide this is. And it tapers, keeps a lot of its mass. They're usually about hand and half proportions, about 34, 33 inch blade. So this very much captures the silhouette of that, and we'll talk more about that kind of later in handling. Other manufacturers have made versions of this sword, like we talked about Albion Arms and Armor. There's one by Katana, one by Dark Sword Armory.
Yep.
And to me, this is the most intriguing sword, sub $1,000, and we'll get on that a little bit later. But yeah, that's what this is.
And it's interesting to know that this was used in the mid 15th and early 16th century. So plate armor was about as good as it was ever going to get at that point. So you needed a sword that could probe the gaps in plate armor and also penetrate chainmail that you'd be wearing underneath that, and additionally cut into lighter arm people wearing gambesons or even just cloth armor. So this sword was a really, really good sort of hybrid between those two tasks.
So your question was about the fit and finish?
Yes. What do you think about it?
Wow. I am impressed. So Chen obviously hasn't made a whole lot of European style grips, but this one is done really well. It is leather and cord imprinted or cord wrapped. I'm not exactly sure which one. Has risers, and I really love the look of the central risers because there's 2 small ones and then one really big one. The shape of the grip is really, really good. And the thing that I'm really blown away by is the pommel. The pommel, if this were on a $1,200 sword, I wouldn't be surprised. It has dimension, it has shape to it that you don't see on a lot of swords at this price range. And the Peened, a thing that I'm kind of a stickler about, is as good as any high-end sword that I have and better than a few. I am blown away by the fit and finish. The gap in the crossguard's pretty good. It's a hollow ground blade we'll talk about later, so you can't get super tight on that. But for the money, even the crossguard has dimensions and shape to it that are really impressive. John, what do you think?
I agree with everything you said. The one fit and finish issue that the sword does have actually isn't on the sword. It's on the scabbard. And I don't know if you want to call that a handling issue or a fit and finish issue. I guess it's kind of both.
It kind of affects both, and it is, in my opinion, the biggest downside of this sword.
Really the only downside of the sword. But one thing to point out, too, before we get into that, about the pommel that Victor was talking about, we were lucky enough to do a collaborative review with Kane Shen. Thanks, Kane. It was awesome. Thank you so much. Call us. And he pointed out to us that if you look at the pommel, and we'll show you some close-up images, you can see that it is not just a disc. It's not just a hockey puck on the end of the sword. It is tapered. So it tapers from wide to thin, which obviously has to have an impact on where the weight distribution is and how the sword handles. And it handles beautifully. Spoiler alert. We'll get to that in a minute. So it obviously works, but Kane made the point that you won't find that on a sword under $1,000 probably, except for this one.
Right.
So that's a really good thing.
Just look at the thickness of the pommel. It tapers, right? Basically, you're not going to find it on any sub 800. No, it's not going to happen. It's a very historical aspect. If you look at the many wheel pommels from all the way from 11th, 12th century to the Renaissance, most of them tapers. It's not a uniform thickness. So you have a $400 sword with a tapered, also dome. If you look at it, even though there's a central recess, the overall surface is not a flat surface. It's domed, right? Overall, I'll say it's practically on par with some of the even that go over to $1,000 swords. You're gonna buy some $1,000 swords and don't have this level of fit and finish and attention to detail. Definitely, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So the complaint though is this. Okay. This is a very, very nice scabbard. It's very aesthetically pleasing. It's got stainless steel hardware. It's got a very nice design. We'll show you some close-ups on that. It's got a really pretty shape on it that's nicely shaped. It's ornate. It's gorgeous. The seam is good. Some other folks have had some trouble with some rippling in the leather. We didn't have any of that. What it does have, though, and we'll show you a close-up, is there isn't wood frame surrounding the mouth of this. So there's actually metal that the sword blade will encounter on either edge. So when you draw the blade in and out of the scabbard, it runs the steel along the inside of this, which is stainless steel, so it's pretty hard, and it'll dull your sword.
Right. So we'll try to get a good close-up shot at that, and we'll have Kane real quick explain to you guys why that is such a bad thing.
Yeah.
Their sharpness is supposed to be really good out of the box, but there's some inconsistent people experience some dull spots over the blade on their swords, and I know that's the case for Kyle, and basically Kyle has all of his LK Chen swords having this issue. It's not an issue for me at the beginning, and after I cut the mask and bring the sword back, and now I feel the edge is just kind of down, and it doesn't cut bottles as well as before, and that's the most serious issue on this model. Is if you look at the scabbard, that's just horrible design. And the locket looks great, right? And if you look at some of the period locket, which I can send you a photo of Brian Kuhn's scabbard for my Albion Prince, it's excellent, but the locket doesn't extend all the way to the mouth of the scabbard, and it doesn't wrap around, right? That's the last thing you will ever want to do on on scabbard, is that on the inside, if you look at this, right, on the inside, there's metal. And so if you draw this, you're going to just casually blunt your sword, right? Dull your sword. Just one draw, and that's it. That one edge is ruined.
And fortunately, neither of us keep our swords in the scabbard type folks. So Victor said the sword's been in the scabbard exactly one time.
Yep.
And he eased it in, took a picture, eased it out, and it's never been back in since.
Literally just to get the photo for this review. And yeah, but some people like displaying their swords in their scabbards. So like that's a real shame on what is otherwise a good scabbard, especially in this price range.
Right. And also if you wanted to practice like drawing, like before you cut and stuff like that, and you're maybe going to draw the sword 4 or 5 times, you definitely would want to, what I'll probably do is volunteer to file that down for Victor so that it doesn't happen. But you shouldn't have to do that. As much as it's a mid-level sword and it's great for the price, but you shouldn't have to do that with a scabbard.
Agreed. Also, thank you. I was going to ask you to do something. I didn't know what, but I was like, please fix it for me.
I have a Dremel. We'll take care of it. It's going to be fun.
Awesome. But yeah, so really that's the biggest fit and finish and or handling complaints. The other minor nitpick complaint about the grip itself.
Yeah.
It's just at the termination to the guard and the pommel, you could see the die doesn't completely go all the way around, and you can see just the brown color of the grip, and it not really a problem at all. It still feels great. It's just aesthetically not so pleasing. But again, for this price range, not really complaining, just needs to be noted.
Right. And that's the thing we've been sort of talking about. If you've watched our channel, you've noticed we've kind of gone from lower mid-range swords to now we've worked in some higher end swords. And so we're really getting a feeling for what a good sword feels like. And so, especially from the high end swords that mostly Victor has bought, we know what a good sword should feel like. And then when you get a mid-range sword like this, you can see where they cut the corners.
Yes.
And that's the area they cut the corners, are little minute fit and finish things that probably could have been easily fixed, but it just, you have to cut corners somewhere to sell this sword for $500.
And as we talked about off camera, as we've gotten further into this hobby and have experienced handling of high-end swords, we are willing to look past those little corners if we get a sword that handles close to what it should.
Exactly.
So on that note, handling.
So this sword is probably lighter and faster and more maneuverable than an 18C should be. The way that the mass is distributed in the blade, and particularly the way that the blade tapers, and this is Kane filled us in on this information and showed us some different examples of replicas of this sword type. It tapers very quickly and loses a lot of mass as it goes outwards in the blade, which probably this should be wider down here and taper more gradually and have more weight there. So technically an 18C probably shouldn't be as lively as this is, but I'm not complaining.
Yeah. So on that note, let's go to some footage real quick of Kane actually explaining that point.
This is like pretty much like a calling card, like iconic trait on LK Chen European swords, is that they seem to feature more profile taper than the usual ones on their from the Italian longsword, right? And their German longsword, I don't know whether they're accurate to the period longsword at all. It seems to be more triangular if you compare it to a Type 18 blade, right? Or Type 16 blade. Usually they have, if you look at the Principe, which I'll send you the footage of the detailed comparison to this sword, it definitely has a more nuanced, non-linear profile taper. First of all, it started out broader at the base, and it has a similar linear profile taper in the bottom a third or so, and then it slows down. It has a very gentle taper up to maintain some width on the middle portion, whereas this one just goes down in a triangular way, right, to reach a acute point. That one has some quite a bit of more width at a point of percussion, and then it pick up the pace to a more triangular tip. Whereas this one, you see, it just basically pretty linear profile taper from the base to almost like 90% of the blade's length, and then it just pick up the pace to an acute point. So it has a very different feeling, and that's going to lead to a little bit different handling because you have less mass over here, right? But this one still maintains some width over here. So I cut with this sword at HEMA Club on tatami mats. It actually cut, the performance was comparable to the Albion Principe. Yeah, that was surprising.
So yeah, John, you're completely right in that the amount of taper that it has, most 18s in general shouldn't have. But you're right in that I'm not complaining because holy crap, does this sword handle beautifully.
Right.
2 hands, 1 hand, doesn't matter. This is, again, if you didn't tell me how much this sword costs, you just put it in my hand and told me go, I would think this was a $1,000 plus sword.
Flirting with $1,000, one side or the other, definitely.
Somewhere around there.
Absolutely.
It handles brilliantly. It's fast. It's lively. Anyone who has handled this sword immediately puts a smile on their face. It makes you, it does what like a high-end sword does, in that it makes you feel like you know what you're doing, even if you don't. And
it sort of like teaches your body how to move around in a lot of ways, which is interesting. Whereas some other swords that we have that are type 18s, we talked about some dark swords that are based on type 18s, and they don't feel like that. It does not give you that experience, and they're nearly double the price.
Right.
So...
And that's the thing. That's, we'll get to that in the value section, but it's remarkable for this price range for something to handle this well. And to have, like we talked about, dimension and stuff in the pommel that, most swords sub $1,000 just don't have. Right. Even swords that handle well don't have that kind of dimension to them.
Right. Like even like, and we should probably cut to Kane now and the way he talked about the value here, because he has some really good things to say.
Definitely. I wholeheartedly endorse this product. It's not perfect, but you're not going to find any perfect sword under $800 on the mid-range and budget market. Not even close. Anywhere near this and the other two models. I have the Knights Templar sword review coming on. That's also amazing. I think that even like presides over these 2 models, because there's so little flaw you can find. But this one, definitely, I would say it's a 9 out of 10. Even without the factor of the price. If you factor in the price, I would just give it 9.5 out of 10. And that 0.5 is definitely just docked from this locket.
So yeah, I completely agree with him. I think that if you handed me this sword and just said, how happy are you with it, without even looking at the price, I would be like, this is a great sword that if I spent $1,000 on it, I'd be happy. It's $400.
Yeah, $488 US dollars.
Oh, yeah. Oh, $500. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So it's
sub $500 sword.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's firmly mid range.
That's ridiculous to me. That, and also mention real quick that like out the box, one of the sharpest swords I've ever gotten.
Sharp, number one, and the edge profile of it is excellent. Like there is absolutely no secondary bevel. There's not even a micro bevel where it's sharp, and it goes straight from the central riser to the blade edge, and there's no deviation there. It's just a straight line. And if you know, like swords for cutting, the recipe for cutting is a wide blade with enough weight and mass and presence to move through.
Right.
And that's what this sword does.
Right. And like, even though it is very, very sharp, it could still, it's not quite shaving sharp, but if you had any proficiency at all, you would have zero trouble getting this to ridiculously scary sharp, I bet.
Scary sharp. And again, it probably doesn't even need to be that much sharper than it is. I mean, I would be very comfortable, I think, cutting tatami with this right now. I think it would cut really, really well.
And real quick, before we wrap up, just touching on the blade itself. So some 18Cs actually are hollow ground, and this has a very, very subtle hollow grind that Kane actually talks about in pretty good detail.
And it just has a beautiful bevel. It has a very ever slight hollow grind geometry. The central ridge is more pronounced than the Albion, Alexandria, and Principe. So you see like a gradual transition of if you put a ruler or something with a straight line here, you're gonna see some light coming through. So there's some just subtle hollow ground geometry, and that leads to some very thin edge. And on mine, there's no secondary bevel, there's no micro bevel, and it's just so refined.
So yeah, I think it's a very, very attractive blade with that slight kind of subtle hollow grind. Just aesthetically, this really captures the look of those 18C, Alexandria Arsenal style swords, and I'm here for it. I think it is a gorgeous sword that handles really well.
And I completely agree. And so we talk, going into overall value now and whether we think it's worth the money. I mean, I think you probably figured out that we do. But we were talking, Kane also has several other versions of this, including the Albion versions and also the Ronin Katana version. And that's more expensive, the Ronin Katana. Isn't it?
$450.
Oh, it's $450.
Same ballpark.
Pretty much same price then. And so he said that when he took it out of the box, actually, we'll cut to him talking about that right now because he's going to do a better job than we will.
Yeah, when I first took this out of the box, wow, this is light. It's almost as light as this one. But then I found out there's some problem because all the reduction of the weight comes from the hilt, right? This is very slender. That's less of an issue. But this pommel is hollow and it's very thin, small in diameter. So that just botched the purpose of a counterweight. And don't let anyone tell you that pommels are not there for counterweight, right? Because even though you can master the mass distribution over the blade, you still need some substantial weight over here. And this blade, it doesn't have that, and so it's just so slow. And it's a slouch to move it around. It's not pleasant at all. So I think that if you want a more faithful representation of the Metropolitan Museum sword, you're gonna have to go for like a higher end, like an Albion. For a budget cutter, like just a loose or more casual representation of the Type 18C, this one is by far the best.
You can see that the way that this sword is designed and built is unbelievable for the price point. So we talk about how we like to have a review channel for people that can spend $1,500 on a sword and people who can't spend $1,500 on a sword. If you are looking for a sword to start your collection with, and you're looking at some lower end swords that are maybe in the $200-300 range, I would recommend that you just hold off a little while, save a bit more money, and get this or one of the swords in this line, because it's inarticulable, the difference between a sword that's made by someone that knows what they're doing, that's balanced correctly, to a sword that where it's not done that way. So for example, the dark sword swords that we have are nearly double the price now. They've gone up in price remarkably, and they handle like crowbars compared to this.
Yes. Yeah, and so Dark Sword does make a version of this. They make an Alexandria sword that is $700 to $800 depending on options. Don't do that. Sorry, Dark Sword, but
not sorry.
If you're looking for this type of sword and you don't want to spend Albion or Arms and Armor money, get this one because it handles brilliantly and it still captures the look. Maybe, it's a little too thin toward the top there profile wise, but it really still captures the essence of what those swords are. This is 1000% worth the money. I'd have spent $700, $800 on this sword and been happy with it.
$700 or $800 and get it without a scabbard.
And been happy.
Absolutely. So for the value for your money, honestly, I mean, this is the story with LK Chen every time we review them. They are among the best value for your money manufacturers that you're going to find. And the fact that this has a Balaur Arms brand on it really doesn't matter much. It's an LK Chen sword.
Right.
And that's the case with them almost every time.
And again, just to reiterate, they've never sent us anything. I spent my own money on this. So there's no bias here whatsoever. We keep buying their products because they're good. Because they're really good, and particularly good as regards handling and value. So yeah, buy it. I mean, if you haven't really taken away that point yet, right? Buy the damn sword.
I don't really know what I think about it. I'm kind of on the fence.
What do we got? Anything else?
I don't think so. So maybe like and subscribe if you don't mind. Thank you very much. Peace.